Hi, ladies. I had wanted to put this video together Monday, but I had no time. It's been a crazy couple of days, so I'm having a moment right now. So I thought I would do this in um, just before we come together tomorrow. So at least we'll have an opportunity to kind of go through some of this content, and we can talk a little bit more about the assignment tomorrow. Which, as you probably have noted, that it's due Friday. Um, but we can discuss, some flexibility around that because we haven't really had a chance to talk about this chapter of the unit. This is a very brief unit, to be honest. It's quite short, um, but nonetheless, still important information to have and to understand. This chapter really focuses on stress and well-being in the workplace. And in your chapter, you would note that we're going to cover some parts of what's talked about in the chapter, but not all of the parts. But I'm just going to fire this on. So, when we think about stress and well being at work, you all maybe have your own experiences perhaps with that in past work experiences, possibly. But nonetheless, it is something that it happens. I mean, whether it's at work or not, we all deal with stress. We all have stress at times. We have different areas that maybe create or cause more stress for us. And I think, that's stress related illness or just stress in general causing anxiety, that can look different for everybody. But nonetheless, as employers in the workplace, we need to be sure that we are kind of addressing and thinking about how do we support our employees before they get too stressed. Um, so some organizations are really good at kind of that preventative stress or preventative things that they have put in place to help reduce that, such as maybe job design or the demands of the job, and or perhaps the time constraints or deadlines, et cetera, and flexibility, perhaps, again, as some examples. So let's just take a look. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the definition of stress, what stressors look like, work and non-work causes of stress. There's two models linking stress to negative consequences. So one's the job demand control support model, and the other one is um, it's basically an employment and um, reward imbalance. Sorry, I just had a whole brain fart there. So, basically talking about how the rewards for the work that you do aren't really matching up, and that can cause negative stress. So we'll talk briefly about that model, the consequence of stress, and stages of preventative stress management. Um, Stress in general, the stress response, as you can see, is the unconscious preparation to fight or flight. You've probably all heard that term, fight or flight. And that is a very much a process that happens in our bodies. Everybody experiences this fight or flight um, phenomenon that happens when we are presented with some stressful type of event, whether it's positive stress or negative stress, because there can be both. There is such a thing as positive stress, and obviously we know that there's a negative stress. I do have a link to a video or a website to take a look at, but I'm not going to play that here. That is something you can kind of take a look at. I'll just click on it for a second. And this is the Mental Health Literacy Organization. And it just talks a bit about understanding stress. Again, a nice resource, and it's one of the resources that you have in your in the introduction. Each one of these introductions in each unit has a handful of different types of resources and things for you to take a look at as part of this unit. So I hope that you're kind of tapping into those, and you may want to definitely look at tapping into some of these for the assignment. But let's just head back there. So again, stressors essentially are a person or event that triggers a stress response. So that, basically you're going to stay and fight and address, or you are avoiding and kind of walking away from that stress. Not always necessarily easy to do. Um, and we will talk about this fight or flight in terms of conflict as well when we have our conflict session with Lori. This certainly speaks to this fight or flight response as well, because conflict definitely is a stressor for most people. And so, as an example, avoiding conflict is kind of that your potentially a person's response would be to walk away or to avoid, and that's that flight versus staying in it and addressing the conflict and or working to manage it. So distress or strain, basically, as a definition, is adverse psychological, physical, behavioral, and organizational consequences. So stress can have adverse effects, not only mentally. Obviously, when you're I don't know about you ladies, but I mean, certainly we can have a lot of negative self-talk. And I think when I think about psychological strain or distress, sometimes those inner voices can have a real lot of space in the brain when we're dealing with stress and can certainly add to and create some more physiological issues the more we are in our heads too much. So again, that physical can be apparent. And also, obviously, organizational consequences from too much stress or strain on employees that can impact the quality of the work that's being done, productivity, efficiency. All of those things can be impacted by stress, clearly. So the stress response as a kind of a um, an example of the stress response, or sorry, not an example of the stress response, but essentially kind of how the stress response works in our bodies is that we have what's called these chemical messengers, or adrenaline is activated by that triggering response, whatever it may be. So let's say it's a conflictual situation. And basically, inside of our bodies, this stuff happens physically inside in both our sympathetic and our endocrine systems. And this adrenaline then kind of gets our bodies into that state of either we're going to fight or we're going to flight. So blood flow, because you probably notice when you have feelings of stress, you have a little more anxiety. Your skin, I know for me, sometimes your skin kind of crawls a little bit. You feel maybe your blood pressure is rising. Perhaps you have a upset stomach or you're irritated in the stomach. Again, this is our body's response to that triggering stress that's happening. So if it's conflict, the adrenaline is starting to activate these things in our bodies that are going to help us either prepare to fight or not. And this really stems back to, like the Stone Age, really, in terms of, if I have to, you know, kill it, find a dinosaur or not. Our bodies are trying to help us to prepare to be able to do that, and that's a natural phenomenon that happens in all of us when we are triggered by any kind of stress response or a stress indicator. And then that physiological shift that happens. So again, uh, confronting whatever that stressor may be, so that offensive posturing. So work and non-work demands. So this is actually a diagram from your text, but in terms of work demands, they can fall under a few different areas. So task demands, in terms of what are the things I actually am doing at work that could be potentially causing me stress. So maybe I'm not progressing in my career as much as I was hoping that I would at a certain point. Maybe new technology has been brought on, and that's a stressor in my tasks that I do daily. It's making me have to rethink and redo and relearn. Change is always a big stressor for most people, although it is the one thing we can always count on. It does cause a lot of stress for many people. Sometimes the demands of our role, so whether it's within your role itself, thinking about task demands, or this idea of intra role, which could be perhaps your role within a department or a team of people that you work with, and perhaps there's conflict between you or other colleagues, or you have issues with personalities, differing differing personalities or opinions in the workplace. That's that intra-role. Those demands can cause stress. Then your own personal role, so that your role in general in your own lives personally, that could be impacting in your workplace as well. Not knowing what your role is or no clarity for sure of what you're supposed to do is also could be chalked up into role demands. There's interpersonal demands and physical demands. So interpersonal demands are obviously those interpersonal actions with others within the workplace. So things like emotional toxins. So you can have what's called these toxic triads or groups in the workplace that can, if you're a part of it, can certainly create a real negative state for you and others who are involved in kind of that, complaining or commiserating together about the work beyond just taking some action around that. Sexual harassment, perhaps poor leadership, can also create stress. And then actual physical demands of a job can also be stressors. So perhaps, again, somebody who, let's say, is working in construction, perhaps there could be some strenuous activity or hazardous substance, or the environment itself isn't safe, etc. So these are some potential demands in the workplace that can cause stress. And then also looking at non-work demands, you can see below some home demands and personal demands can also fall under that. And obviously, we bring these things with us. They don't leave us when we go to work. So we also have to address those issues outside of work to help us perhaps also be better at work, or to find a way to diminish or decrease the stress that you're experiencing. The two models linking stress to negative consequences are the job design control support model, which really suggests that strain is caused by high demands where you don't have a lot of control in the work that you do or say, and not a lot of support or feedback from those who are overseeing your work. And again, on the flip of that, there is the employee reward imbalance. Effort reward imbalance. So if you are putting in a really high effort in your work that you do, but the return, perhaps whether it's monetarily, maybe it's getting praise perhaps for your work or being acknowledged for the work that you do, but whatever that may be, there is a suggestion that both of these models suggest that these are linked to negative consequences for employees. So as employers, we need to recognize both of these potentially can cause strain in our employees, and how do we not get to that point? How do we address high demands and not having enough control or support? Well, we think about how do we give our employees a little more autonomy in their job or a little more say in what they do, and also making sure that we're providing supports for them. As an example, so some of the negative consequences of stress, as you can see here, obviously all kinds of physical conditions can arise from stress that's exerted for too long. There are positive pieces of stress where that usually happen in a very short burst, short amounts of time, that don't have a negative impact on us in terms of our health. But stress over time, or stress that continues to be in place, is going to impact us in a whole host of ways. And you can see some of those costs of continued stress in the workplace. And again, speaking of positive consequences of stress, I mean, again, we have to think about the time that we are in kind of that stressed state. And so this model basically is suggesting that performance arousal can happen with stress being added in terms of being able to get let's say to get a job done or a task done, and you have a specific amount of time. That stress associated with being able to complete that task can be a positive, having a little bit of stress. So if you think about when you have an assignment coming due and you know it's due the next day, that stress will most likely put your body into the mode of, okay, I got to get this done. I'm going to get to work and I'm going to do my part. That's basically kind of the area where positive stress happens. It increases our performance. Um, to be able to complete a task. My timer's going to run out. These are 15-minute videos. I'm going to pause this and I will have